All right, hello everyone. My name is Regan Pufal. I will be the instructor today for a Photoshop's basic webinar. So we'll kind of look at the kind of key concepts that you will need to use Photoshop effectively and to kind of give you a firm footing for when you Google this kind of stuff, because there's a lot of really good support videos out there on this that you'll understand some of the terminology and spacing to be able to basically accomplish what you need to do. I teach art and graphic design over at Iowa Western, and I am also a local artist here in town that works both in digital and traditional mediums. If you go to the chat feature in our webinar, there is a Dropbox link containing the files that we are going to be using today. You're welcome to download them at any time. I don't usually move my Dropbox stuff around that much, but it'll definitely be good for tonight. And I would go ahead and download them even if you don't plan on working along with us right now, because you can always watch this webinar later as a recording that's available through DoSpace's Facebook page, I believe. So if you ever want to go back through and practice the stuff we're talking about today with those files, you can, so which is pretty neat. All right, so we are going to look at a program called Photoshop. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen with you all. And I'm going to share my full screen. So you'll see some of my Zoom stuff on here, because unfortunately, sometimes Photoshop opens up these other separate windows and it can make, and it's not always clear on which ones they'll be showing and why not. I'm also going to turn off my face light now that we're on screen share. It's very bright. All right, so Photoshop is what we call a raster editing program. So what I mean by raster is there's multiple types of images on a computer, and a raster image is an image made up of a set number of pixels. So like it has a literal dimension to it. And so what Photoshop allows you to do is dynamically change any of those pixels to any of the other possible values it could be. Theoretically, you could make literally any image ever in Photoshop just by running through every possible pixel combination. There's actually kind of a cool art piece about it. But for us, let's just start with an underlying image and go from there. So here is what we call our home screen on Photoshop. You know what, let me make my mouse a little bit bigger for you guys real quick so it's easier for you all to see and track. Because, you know, there's nothing quite like having to squint at a mouse. And there we go, giant mouse, Chungus mouse. So this is your home screen. There's a bunch of really neat tutorials right here. These tutorials are actually pretty darn good. So if you see something here that kind of piques your interest on something that you want to do, watch it. These are real good, like really good, like Photoshop and Adobe. Well, I don't have a lot of nice things to say about Adobe. They do make very good tutorials. So you could either start from scratch and do create new. So this is something that a lot of people that do digital painting would do. Or in our case, most Photoshop is you're going to work on an existing picture. So I'm going to go ahead and click on open. And I'm going to start with this picture, this painting of a man pointing at us, Delacroix or something like that. I don't remember his full name. And if you get this missing profile warning, go ahead and assign it Adobe RGB. Don't worry too much about what this means right now. If you really get into Photoshop, you'll learn a little bit more about color spaces. But for us today, it's not something that's too important. And then I'm going to reset my workspace so that when you first open up your system, it'll look probably something just like this. So Photoshop wears many hats. So while I called it a raster editing program, it does more than just edit pictures. So up here in the top right is a little box next to a magnifying glass. And this box basically are the different hats that Photoshop wears. Like you can do some 3D work in here. I wouldn't, but you can. You can do motion in here. So like you can do primitive video editing, and like you can set up like GIF animations, like those little dancing hamsters or whatever you see on the internet. You can make that pretty easily in Photoshop using motion. Painting's exactly what it sounds like. Photography is exactly what it sounds like. And graphics and web is exactly what it sounds like. And all this is it just changes the layout and sometimes adds like additional interfaces to Photoshop to make it easier for you to do whatever task. For us, Essentials is going to be just fine, so we'll stay in Essentials. Now, Whenever we change something about our workspace, we can always get back to our default one by clicking on here and going to Reset Essentials. So as you move through learning this program and playing with it, don't feel barred from moving any of the stuff that we're going to be working with right now, because you can always get it back. It's always recoverable. So about our workspace, over here on the left are our ways to directly interact with our canvas or parts of our canvas. So these are our tools. And whenever we have a tool, you'll notice that along the top of the screen, this changes. This is our toolbar. And so whenever we have a tool selected, we'll get some of the more primitive controls for it up here. Now, occasionally, depending on what tool we pick, there's also going to be a panel for it over here that will have more options than will be available in the toolbar. But the toolbar will cover like 90 to 95% of what you need. But sometimes you'll need those advanced controls. Like that's particularly true of like if you get into painting and you have the brush tool, like you just don't have that much available up here without having to click into things to get it. But if you bring out the brushes and brush settings panel, you get really robust control over it. Now setting up your panels well is also going to be very key to like having a good time in Photoshop. So normally what I would do is I would have this expanded out, which I can do by clicking on this little arrow to bring it open. And then I definitely want my layers available. And then these other ones can be up to you. So I generally like to pull out adjustments if I have room. So I'm going to click on this adjustments tab. I'm going to pull it out and mouse over this properties one. You see that blue line appearing? So that's telling me that it's going to drop into there. And now I have my adjustments and properties out separate. Libraries, which I won't be using today, you could actually close. If I right click on it, I can do close and that goes away. So anything that you don't ever need or you don't find yourself using, remove it from your workspace. And always keep in mind that you can reorder and move these guys around. So like later when we're working with the text tool and we bring open the character panel, wherever it appeared. Oh, is it down there? Window, character. Yeah, so it's like down here and it's not useful. So I'd probably drag it out and bring it over here so I can work with it as I'm working with my text. Anyway, for now, I'm going to close character. All right, so what I want to do today is I want to kind of create a generic meme. So I've got this guy here pointing at me, and then I'm going to open up another picture that I want to add to it. So I'm going to go to open, and I'm going to open up my baby picture. Here we got Pope Leo something, 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 one of the popes, this fancy Zoroastrian fish hat. Hi there, Pope. And then I'm going to go to File, Open, and I also want to add this awesome background to it. So I'm going to remove the background from that Decroix picture and add this, don't quote me on the artist, Thomas Moran painting. And then, you know, maybe if we have time, why don't we actually add a real photograph to it? And why don't we actually add this cupcake being offered to the baby and Decroix? So some real basic kind of key idea of what you do in Photoshop. You put photos together. We call it compositing. So first things first, what we want to do is we want to add the baby to this picture. So I can come over to baby and I can select all of it and I can add it that way, or I can do file place, which in our case I would not do, or I can also do, I can open up multiple windows next to each other. The easiest way I think it is to do this is to come up to select and go to select all. And we'll see these little marching ants appear around the edge of our picture. And that's telling me that I have it selected. So then I can go up to edit and copy, and then I can come back over to this picture. So like I'm clicking on these tabs up here, by the way, to move between my images. And I can go to edit, paste to drop in that baby picture. Now notice when I add in that baby picture, two things happened over here in my panels. One, in my history panel, I had a new step appear, and that's the paste step. So every single time I do something that changes the image, changes what I can see here, I'll get a new history step. So that can even include turning on layer visibility and so on. I get a new step for each one of those. And what's really neat about this is at any point, I can always click back to any of these steps to revert my image back to that point. Now there is a limit, depending on how you have Photoshop set up, you'll either have 25 or 40 available steps, and you can set it to be quite a bit more than that if you want. But just keep in mind that if you put in too many steps, it can slow down Photoshop quite a bit. So keep in mind that as long as you have the step available, you can always go back. Now, when you save and close a Photoshop file, this history is going to go away. So that's only while you have it open. So also when I dropped in that baby picture, and so you can see I can click open, I go to paste, we can see that it appears here as a layer. So these layers is a real basic concept for a lot of Adobe programs. So this will be true of like even Adobe Dimension, but you'll see it in Adobe Illustrator, you'll see it in Adobe InDesign, anything where you're kind of piling elements up together. And the easiest way to think about layers is like old Scooby-Doo animations. So like we all watched Scooby-Doo. We could see that the background was a painted static background and stuff would move across it. So, you know, Shaggy would be walking across it, Scooby would be walking across it. And if they had to interact with something that was the background, it would be painted a little different so they could grab and pull out that drawer. And then let's say they walked outside and everything turned blue. So like in our layers, what we would see is the background for Scooby-Doo, then we'd have like Shaggy right here. And then if they walked outside and it was blue, there'd actually be like a transparent blue layer over this to kind of tint everything that color. Or they could do it that way, or they can paint them blue, or like, you know, there's a bunch of ways to do it. It's like if they're underwater. So we have to think about this in that kind of exact same concept. Each layer is going to be stacked on top of one another, and it's going to affect the one underneath it unless we tell it to do certain things. And just like with that drawer, where we have that drawer picked off, and if we actually pulled that piece of plastic out, it would literally be just that drawer. So we can look at something called masking in a minute that's going to be like that same idea. So let's move this baby into position. So I'm going to make the baby layer active. And you know what, why don't we go ahead and label it? So I'm going to double click on where it says layer 1 and I will type in baby. Labeling your layers is always a good idea. And with this layer active, and I can tell it's active because it has that little box around the layer preview right here. And then the layer itself is marked in lighter gray. I'm going to go up to edit and let's flip it so he's looking the other direction because I think that'll look better. So I'm going to go to transform and I'm going to go to flip horizontal and it will turn the baby. Then I'm going to want to remove the background from the baby and make him bigger. So to make him bigger, I'm going to go to edit, transform, and I can go to scale. I could also use this free transform tool, Command T or Control T, depending on my operating system. And I can just click and drag on this corner to scale it up and down. Now let's say that I wanted to make the baby fatter. So like there's no, it's not making him fatter, it's making the whole thing bigger. So if I wanted to distort this picture, if I hold down the Shift key, I can then start distorting my image. In this case, I don't want to, so I just want to make him bigger. And then I'm going to click and drag him down into this corner. Now, what's nice is that it's never going to get rid of that background. It's not going to delete the picture parts if I tell it. So I can push it off to the side and it's still there, but I haven't, as long as I don't tell it to remove that. Now I want to get this background off of the baby. So I'm going to make something called a selection. So up here for my tools, the first tool I have is the move tool, and that's how I've been moving this around. Then the tools immediately after that are 3 different selection tools. Selections is a way of telling Photoshop that I only want to work with a certain part of this image. So like we have some fairly straightforward marquee tools, so like it draws rectangles, or if I click and hold on it, you'll see that there's like an ellipse tool version of it where I can draw circles. This can be very useful for like doing certain types of design, not for cutting out the baby. Underneath it, we have our lasso-based tools. So it's the same idea as these marquee tools, except now I can click and drag and draw, a free-form line. If I click and hold on that lasso, we can see that there's 2 more lassos in here that used to be fairly useful, but we don't use them too often anymore. So there's the polygonal lasso tool, which draws selections by just making a line. And then you can bring it up to the last point, and finish your selection. And then the one underneath that is the magnetic lasso tool, where you click and drag along an edge and it will try to grab it for you. So like this one actually could be used to pull out this baby, but there's better tools to use than that one. Next, we have our smart selection tools. We have our object select tool, which is new. Thank you, Photoshop, our quick select tool, and our magic wand tool. How the magic wand tool works, so it's a wand with little dots next to it, is anywhere I click, it will try to pick any pixels that look kind of like those other pixels. So this can be a useful way of picking up, big block areas of stuff. In our case, like we could go through and try to clean it up enough to grab this baby, but there's faster ways to do it. So if I click and hold on the magic wand tool and I pick the quick select tool, I can just paint on this background area, and just kind of like with that magic wand, it will be like, oh, you want the stuff that looks like this? I got you, fam. And it will select that for me. Now I could use something called the erase tool, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's right here. It looks like an eraser. Since I have this background selected, it won't allow me to erase the background. It will only allow me to affect the area that I have selected. My brush size will look much larger, by the way, because I increased the size of my mouse earlier. But let's say that I didn't, there's better ways to do this. So like if I go back to my quick select step, so like here's my 2 erase steps. So I go back to my quick selection step, I can hide this background. So if I ever need to bring it back later, I can still work with it. And so this is where I'm going to save this selection as a mask. So over here in my layers panel at the bottom is something that looks like a rectangle with a circle in it. This is a add layer mask button. And anytime I have a selection active, it will add that selection as a mask. So if I click it, you can see that it added add my selection as my mask. So unfortunately, in this case, I had my background selected, so that's what it kept. And we can see that as a preview right here in my layer mask, that you can see that background as that little area. Now, if I want to have the baby selected, if I want to have the baby showing, I would either have to select the baby and then click the layer mask button, or much more easily, I can just invert this mask. So if this mask active, so notice that I have the little white box around it, I'm going to go up to image, and I am going to go to adjustments, and I'm going to go to invert. Boink, and it inverts that layer mask. You can see that it's now the opposite right there. So if we click between my history steps, you can see it flip. And now just the baby is visible. Quite effective. Now, unfortunately, my baby is in front of this marvelous pointing hand and cane staff. There really isn't any room right here to fit that baby. So I need to change my canvas size. Looks like we've got some stuff going on in chat. And zoom back in, chat will refresh. All right. So let's add some space to the side of this. So there's 2 different ways to change the dimensions of this image. One of them we'll look at later is called image size. Like if we go to image and image size, it changes the number of pixels, and it does resampling. So it won't change the appearance of the image. It'll just make it bigger or smaller. But if I want to add space to it, I need to add to the canvas. So I could go up to image and I can go to canvas size and I can manually type it into here. So let's say that there was like a set pixel size or a set inch size that I needed to add onto this, and I knew that. I could type that in and do that here. If I want to eyeball it, I could use the crop tool, which is right underneath our selections, and basically drag over and add space. So normally when you think of the crop tool, you're thinking of, like you're going to be cutting stuff off, so, cut it up to there or whatever. In our case, we're going to use it to add, which I think is kind of neat that they added that feature to Photoshop. So I'm just going to click and drag this over a little bit to give me room to add that baby. Now, oh, my background is locked here. I'm going to hit escape to exit my crop. I'm going to click right here where I have the lock on my background. And now when I use the crop tool, there we go. This content aware option is available. So I click that content aware option on, and then we'll drag until that crosshair is, right over this little fluff on his cheek. And I'll click the check mark box to say, yes, I do like this. Now, since I had that content aware checkmark box on, it automatically filled in that empty space for me, which is pretty cool. And it did a really good job. On some pictures, it won't do so hot of a job. So like right here, you can see that it added his button on there, thinking that that was just regular background. Now we do want to clean up this random line that has appeared in here. So we're going to use some of our healing tools to do that. So healing tool would be like what you would use to remove dust or other things from a picture. So a little bit further down in our toolbar, we have something that looks like a Band-Aid. I'm going to click and hold on that Band-Aid, and I'm actually going to pick the spot healing brush tool rather than the one that was active, the healing brush tool. I'm going to pick the spot healing brush tool. And then to change my brush size, I can right click with my mouse and I get this little handy dandy brush size changer and hardness changer, so like how hard my edge is. So I'll go ahead and drop this down to like 25 or so, and I'll set my size to around 100. Now, again, my brush is going to appear much larger than yours. Well, here, we'll just shrink it back down. So my brush size is actually more like this when I have it set to 100. And now I can paint over this button, and it will look at everything around that area and go, huh, I guess you actually want this there. And I can do that same thing to this line. So I'm just going to paint over this line, and it will look at either side of the area that I just painted over and says, oh, I guess you really want it to look like this instead. So it's pretty cool and neat that it's that quick and easy. It's like I can be like you, or like if I wanted to be creepy, I could be like, why don't we just get rid of his eyeball? Like it's gross. We'll click back right here to bring back his eyeball. All right, we're done with the brush. So let's get my mouse nice and big again. By the way, as I'm going pretty fast because you have a video of this to watch later. But if there's anything that you want to see done again, or you have certain questions for clarification, go ahead and ask as we're going, and I will try to answer them as we go. There will also be a few minutes at the end to answer any more questions that anyone has as well. All right, so I'm going to bring my baby back. So I can turn my visibility of my layer on and off by clicking on this eyeball. So my eyeball, click on it to bring the baby back. I'm going to go back up to my move tool, and let's drag Pope Leo here over. And just like that, we have a little bit better of a composition. You know what, looking at this, there's a little bit too much space over here on the other side of Delacroix. So why don't we grab our Delacroix, the crop tool, and why don't we crop a little bit off that side just to tighten this up a little bit. Not bad. Now let's add in that background. So I'm going to come up to my Shenandoah River picture, and instead of doing the edit select all method, let's take a look at another way that you can add stuff to things in Photoshop. So I'm going to come up to Window, and I'm going to go to Arrange, and I can pick pretty much any of these, but let's do Window, Arrange, and let's do 2 up vertical. So I have things side by side. And why don't we do Shenandoah over here? So I just clicked and dragged it over so I could see it on this side of the window. So it's like having 2 tabs open at the same time, like in Chrome or whatever. Then I'm going to make sure the river is active. So it's not this side that's active. Notice how my layers change. I'm going to have this one active. So this is the layer I can see. And I'm just going to click and drag that layer over here and drop it into the other image. And just like magic, it's in there. Thanks. I have the last Photoshop before you had to pay the monthly fee. Will instructions be different for me? There will be some tools not available to you. So like when we were looking at the selection tools, some of those are not going to be available to you because those are fairly new. For the most part, we will be looking at universal tools, so that shouldn't be too much of an issue for you. All right, close tab. So now you see that it dropped it on top of everything. So that's not useful. So I'm going to go back to my move tool, just so I don't have the crop tool active. You can see that like it's in front of the baby and it's in front of the pointing man. So if I click and drag this layer to the bottom of my layer stack, it is now behind all of them. Now I can't see it because this dude right here still has his background. So why don't we remove his background? So to make my life easier, I'm going to click the eyeball to hide the baby. And then I'm going to make the guy layer active. And why don't we just go ahead and label that layer guy? And why don't we label this one background now, since it's now our background. So let's try a couple other ways of removing stuff. So like last time we used the quick select tool and we just painted over the background. When we have any of these smart select tools active, so like object select or quick selection, in our toolbar, something called subject select becomes available. So why don't we go ahead and try subject select. So I'm going to make guy active. I'm going to have one of my smart selection tools, and I'm going to select subject, and let's see what, woo, look at that. Pretty darn good. Now there's some little goofs, like right there, that's not great, and it's messed up his poll. So we want to clean this selection up. So a really advanced way of doing selections is you'll start with something like this, and then you'll go into select and mask. So select and mask will mark the area that's selected. So I'm going to come over here to view. Yours probably looks more like this. So where it says view, go ahead and click on view and pick overlay. And in overlay, turn this opacity down. So that's the red block off, down to 20 or so percent, just so we can see what we're doing. Then I'm going to zoom in so I can look at these areas that need to be fixed. So I'm going to hit Command or Control, depending on my operating system, to zoom in. And now I want to look at different parts of the image. So if I hold down the space bar, my tool turns into a hand tool that allows me to click and drag and move my view around. Very nice. So again, Command or Control, depending on your operating system, plus or minus to zoom in. And then if you hold down the space bar, you can click and drag on the image to change where you're looking. All right, my toolbar in Select and Mask is much more limited. So I've got just these guys over here, and these are fairly similar to what we were looking at before. We have our Quick Select tool. We have a Refine Edge tool, which is really good for fixing up hair. So we'll try it here in a second. A paintbrush, which is just an on or off for this mask. And then our Object Select tool, which works basically by you click and drag over an area and say this. In our case, we'll use the Quick Select tool, and notice how it's got a plus sign on it. So that means it's going to add to the image. And I'm going to paint over any areas on here that need to be added back in. So like there's a little bit of his hair missing, and I can see it through this red mask on here, since I don't have the opacity turned all the way up, areas that need to be brought back in. And I've got a brush going. So let's shrink my mouse back down, and let's click and drag over his hand. Bring that in. Oops, you can see it added too much. So I can either click on this minus to get the subtract version, or if I have the plus still active, if I hold down the Alt or Option key, it switches to the inverse mode, so minus mode. So it allows you to quickly add and subtract areas. So I'm not holding down my Alt Shift key right now, and I'm painting over his staff. We can see that it added too much. So I'll hold down my Alt or Option key and paint over this background to start removing some of it back out. Right here, it needs to be added in. So whoops, so minus. And again, since I'm using the Quick Select tool, it's fairly smart about it, but it's not perfect. Like you might have to move it around a little bit and go back and forth to get it to work exactly right. Oops. Yeah, so like right here, it's just not going for it. So I'll go ahead and grab the brush, and I'm just going to, holding down the Alt key now, brush this area in manually, because it's just like, it's not going to do it. Same thing with this lower area on the staff. Let's just brush you back in manually, since it doesn't want to do it with the Quick Select tool. Right here needs to be removed. So we'll just go ahead and Quick Select you out. Oops, got to hold down the Alt key. And there we go. That looks pretty good. And it didn't grab this area. So let's go ahead and remove all of this. And why not down here? You can see we got a little bit of the coat, so I'm gonna have to fix that out in a second. Ooh, okay, Command Z, way too much. So instead of clicking and dragging, I'm just clicking. And I'm gonna switch back to the brush, and I'm gonna do this edge manually. So I right click to get this open, and I can drag my hardness down a little bit, and hold down the Alt key to paint this out manually. Same thing right here. I'm probably going to just paint this back in with the brush rather than trying to do the Quick Select tool. And luckily, since we're doing paintings, we don't actually have to have that clean of selection edges, whoopsies, which makes this come out a little bit more easily for us. All right, for this last little bit of hair right here, I'm going to grab the Refine Edge tool. If I paint over this, it will kind of do this nice little feathering effect to try to make it look more like the edge of the hair. Now this looks pretty good. There's other areas that could be cleaned up. We don't need to work on this all day. So I'm going to zoom out. So I'm going to hit Command 0 and it fits it onto our screen. Oops, and we can see we actually missed a little bit of area down here. So let's paint you in real quick. And that'll be good. And then I click OK. Now there's all these other ways to adjust this. This is advanced. You'll get to it when you get to it. It's a very powerful, satisfying way to move things around. Looks like we got some more stuff going on in chat. Looks like technical stuff for Zoom, so I'll leave that one to you guys. All right, so oops, I accidentally deselected when I clicked on something. So we can see my selection now is active around here, and I'll just click that quick mask button again, and just like magic, it cuts out that background for us. You know what, let's click the eyeball next to the baby to bring the A baby back, and we've got an idea now of what our image looks like. Now we need this marvelous painting of the Niagara Falls to be a little bit bigger. So I'm going to click on background and I'm going to hit Command T, which is exactly the same as going to edit free transform. And that gives me these bounding boxes again on here, just like what we did with the baby, to increase the size of the image. And I'm just going to drag the image size up until it fills it up and down. And I can click the check mark box to say, cool, I like that. Now, since I didn't delete any pixels, I can always come back to the Move tool and click and drag on this background to change the positioning of Niagara Falls. Now, he's pretty contrasty and Niagara Falls isn't. So why don't we adjust the appearance of Niagara Falls to better match our pointing man? So I'm going to click on my background so it's active. So again, little gray marking on it. And I'm going to make an adjustment. In our case, why don't we try the levels adjustment? So these adjustments are ways of changing the appearance of the image. So for many of them, it will be just like changing lights and darks. You can change images to black and white with it. You can change the color of the image. These are really good ways of adjusting image appearance because it's undoable. So if this levels adjustment active, I have these 3 different points right here that allow me to change how dark it is, how dark the midtones are, and then how bright the whites are. So in this case, why don't we darken those black tones up to, I don't know, 20 or so. And why don't we drag our midtones over to 55 or so. And that's starting to match Delacroix quite a bit better. You know what? I think actually, yeah, that actually looks pretty good. Why don't we drag the whites over to about 250 just to make it a little bit punchier in the background. Or let's not. Let's leave the whites alone. And so just like that, we've adjusted the appearance of the background. And I can always go back and change it again. So let's say, you know, I'm on this baby layer and I'm playing around with it and moving it and so on. If I click back on the levels, I get in properties that here to play around with again. So like I can always come back to it. I can always turn it on and off too by hitting this plus and minus. Now in Renaissance painting, this usually gets merged into the background a little bit. So I'm going to make my guy layer active. And notice when I make my guy layer active, it starts with a little white box around a preview of what the layer looks like. But if I click on the mask, I get a box around that mask. So I want that active. Now, if I come over to my paintbrush tool and, you know, I do something like right click, set our brush size to 150 or so, and let's leave our hardness at 0. Yeah, let's make our brush size 200 or so. And then I can click and I have a 200 sized brush. I can now manually add or subtract to this mask with white and black, which is our default colors right here. So white will make stuff appear. So like, oops, let me set my brush to default. There we go. So white will make stuff appear. So like there's that original painter background, right? So I want to bring some of that background back right here to kind of help merge the painting scene and make it look a little bit more naturalistic, maybe even a little bit down here. But that's too much. You see how it's adding in too much? So with my brush active. If I come up here to opacity and I turn this down, so I can click on where it says opacity and drag down, or I can click in here and type in like 20, or I can click on the drop down and get a little drop down slider for it. Anyway, just drop it down to 20 or so. And then you can click down in here to start partially revealing the background because it's not a fully opaque brush. And we'll do a little bit of that up here around here, a little bit right there. Again, all I'm doing is just kind of hiding. I'm just softening the edge of this to kind of help merge it with the painting behind him. And so like here, if we click in my history, so if I go back to layer visibility and I click the brush on, you can see that it really helps merge him into that scene. So really cool thing, you can edit and change these masks, and all masks are, again, are a saving of selections. So let's look at adding some text. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click on the T for text tool, and I'm going to come up to window and I'm going to click on character, and I'll get my little character panel. In your character panel, if yours doesn't look like mine, click on these three little drop downs right here. And if there's something like, say, like show options or something, click on that so it has everything here. This is just like what it is in Microsoft Word, maybe a little bit fancier. So I'm not going to go too far into it, but like I can come into here and I can pick my fonts. Adobe has a really robust font system for you to get more fonts too, so it's very handy. In our case, let's pick a fairly universal font that everyone hates. So I'm going to type in Impact because everyone loves Impact. I'm going to click on Impact Regular where it says size. Why don't we try 72 for now and see how that looks? And we'll leave the rest of this alone. So I'll click and we'll see when we get our little lorem ipsum, which is pretty small. And why don't we type in, I would like I'll do all caps, cupcake, comma, sir. Now, right now, it's not big enough. So if I hold down the Command or Control key, I get my little bounding box again, just like with Command T for transform, but that doesn't work because we have the text tool active. And I can click and drag on this corner to change the size of my text. Now notice that it distorts. So if I don't want it to distort, I need to hold down the Shift key after I've started clicking and dragging. So I'm clicking and dragging, and I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and it will transform it in a way to keep it without distortion. Now, if I also hold down the Command or Control key, it allows me to reposition my text as well. So I'm going to move my text up here because it makes sense to throw it up there. Now, at any point, I can always come back to my text and select it and like change my color. Like that's just, it's not, this part isn't super hard or rocket science. My sizing is still available. My letter spacing is still available. My tracking and my kerning is available. Like all this stuff will never go away as long as you leave it as a text layer. Let's go ahead and click on the move tool. And this is not looking too bad. So let's do our final step and let's add in our cupcake. So I'm going to go over to our cupcake. Again, I'm just clicking on the cupcake that I've already opened, and I'm going to grab one of my quick select tools, and I'm just going to delete out the background right off the bat by only copying what I want over. So I'm going to click on select subject. Again, I have my one of my smart selection tools active, and this one did a pretty darn good job. So let's hit Command or Control C or go up to Edit, Copy, and we'll go back to Decroy right here. And we'll do Command or Control V for paste or edit paste. And there is our cupcake. I'll come back up to my move tool. I will click and drag it into position and notice that it's behind the baby. It's because I had my dude layer active. So it put it above the dude layer, but below the baby and the text. So I'm going to click and drag my cupcake to be above the baby. And there we go. There's my cupcake. Now that cupcake hand is a little bright, and it's a little the wrong color. So why don't we go ahead and grab, why don't we try photo filter? So we'll click on photo filter here in adjustments. Ooh, my mouse is small for you guys. Let's make it big again. Big mouse, not doing any more brushwork. So I clicked photo filter, and you can see we got this, we get a slider right here that adds yellow. Now notice that this affects the whole image, which is not something that's going to be great for us. So we're going to use what I call the Hey This Guy button. So my photo filter adjustment layer is active, but notice there's this box right here at the bottom of properties while it's active. That's the Hey This Guy button. And if I click it, a little arrow will appear next to that photo filter layer pointing to my cupcake layer. And now it only affects the cupcake, just like magic. And that yellow looks pretty good. It still looks a little bright. So why don't we go ahead and make another levels adjustment. And that levels adjustment will be above my photo filter. I'm going to go ahead and right off the bat hit the Hey This Guy button. So it's only going to affect my cupcake layer. And instead of doing like a darkening right off the bat, what I'm going to start with is I'm actually going to lower the white point. So we used these 3 points before. Underneath it is another slider that allows me to set where I want my darkest black and my brightest white to be. So I'm going to click that white one and I'm going to drag it over to reduce the brightest white on this. And then why don't we go ahead and drag that mid-tone slider over. And why don't we try bringing up those black tones a little bit to bleach it out. And that matches pretty good. So I've got 0, 0.59, 255, 25, and 230. And we could slide this around a little bit more to get it to match even better. But for us, this will be quick and easy. So there we go. We've got our primitive meme right here. We got dude, baby, cupcake. Yes, baby wants cupcake. Dude wants that cupcake. Funny times. Har, har, har. Now I want to save my work. So let's save it. So when you go to File and you pick Save for the first time or do Save As, you want to save it as a Photoshop file, which is the default setting. So you'll name it something like, I don't know, har har meme, whatever a descriptive name. And then you'll make sure that you have Photoshop selected and you will click Save. The rest of this stuff doesn't matter because the defaults right here should be fine. Don't mess with any of this other stuff, and you'll just click Save and you'll have your PSD. Now your PSD file will always keep your layers. So as long as you haven't done anything to get rid of these layers and then saved it, your layers will be available. So you'll always be able to come back and do things like change your text. So it's like, maybe I want sir in lowercase. I can always come back and change it because I have my layers. Which is good. So you want to save the work that you're going to want to be able to come back to as a PSD, because you always then have the ability to come back and change things. Now, you can't send people PSDs. Like not everyone has Photoshop and most people's computers don't know how to read or work with Photoshop files. Excuse me. So we need to resize it. And then we need to save it as a JPEG. Because right now it's also quite big. It's more than 2,000 pixels big. So we'll make it smaller so it sends faster to people by email. And then we'll save it as a JPEG, which is a small file format that plays nice with everyone's computers. So you'll save your PSD, and then that will be your archive version. Anything that you're doing now, you're not going to save to your PSD. So don't hit save as you're working on this. Don't, when you close it, it's like, would you like to save your PSD work? The answer is no. So I'm going to click on image. I'm going to pick image size. And I get my ability to change my pixels. So right here is a drop down that allows you to pick whichever method that you want. So like percent, pixels is the one we'll use, inches, centimeters, millimeters, etc. Points and pecas are for typography. I have no idea what columns it's for, to be honest. But we'll pick pixels, and for width, we'll go ahead and type in 900. 900 is a really good size for the internet. 1200 is also pretty good. I wouldn't go smaller than 600, and I wouldn't go bigger than 1500. We'll leave resolution alone, and we'll leave this resample thing alone because it's not going to be important for us today. If you do a lot of artwork that you're going to be printing, this window becomes very important. And I'll click OK. And it will make my image smaller, which again will be good for when I'm sending it around the internet. So that means that like when I zoom in on it, you'll notice that we've lost some clarity because there's fewer pixels making up our image. That's what we've done by changing the image size. Then to make it into a format that I can send and share with people, I'm going to go up to File, and I'm going to pick Save As. Again, don't click Save because this isn't undoable in a PSD. once you've closed it. So click Save As, and in our dropdown, you'll want to pick JPEG, which is our universal sharing format. Now, there's a bunch of formats in here, and the ones that you'll see people talk about every so often would be like GIF. So this allows for transparent backgrounds, and if you're making those animations in Photoshop, you'll export it as a kind of GIF. JPEG 2000, don't use JPEG stereo. Photoshop PDF, if you need to make a PDF file, it's a little clunky, but you can do it here. You won't want to make this a raw file. PNG is a lot like GIF updated. So this has really good color and it supports transparency as well. But it's a big fat file size, so it doesn't like to send around on the internet well. But people like to say that you should use it. And if you're not making web graphics, you probably shouldn't be using it. TIFF is a good file format for photographers who need high-end printing. But for just getting started, Photoshop to be able to change and edit your files afterwards, JPEG for sending and sharing with people. And notice when I click JPEG, a bunch of these things go around. It's going to save it as a copy. So if I click Save, I get my JPEG option window. In this case, I think the default is like high baseline or whatever. You can just go ahead and click maximum. Like at this point, it's going to be small enough that it doesn't matter, and there's no reason to add some artifacting in there. You click OK, and now you have your shareable JPEG. Now, when you close this, it's going to be like, do you want to save your PSD? And it's like, no, I saved it before I did my resize. So I don't want to save where I've made it smaller. Now we've got about 14 minutes left. So if you have any questions or you want to see certain things demoed, now is your chance to ask either in the question and answer feature of Zoom or in the chat feature. And if we run out of questions, I'll demo one or two more tools before the end of the session. So let's pop open chat and see what we've got going on. More technical stuff. We'll be able to rewatch this. Yes, this is always on Facebook. And that I'll go ahead and post the files again for you. Oh, it's not letting me command and paste. If you scroll up, the files will be up there for you guys to watch and play around with. Yes, we have this video and an older video with the materials a little bit different. It covers the same topics, but I've decided to make this one a little bit more fun with paintings. So unless we have any more direct questions, we can look at some more fancy tools in Photoshop. So maybe we don't like the baby's expression right here. So let's back up for my image size. So I'm going to click on this edit type step. Notice how much bigger the image is. I'm going to hold down the space bar. And I'm going to look at that baby's face. And you know what, Pope Leo, I really want you to smile. And we're going to make Pope Leo smile. So I'm going to click on my baby layer. And when I click on it, I want to make sure that this one has the white box around it, not the mask, but the baby. And I'm going to come up to Filter, and I'm going to go to Liquify. Now, Liquify is a dangerous tool. We got another question in chat. Thank you. Okay. Now, Liquify is a dangerous tool. So this is the tool that they use to make people look thin. This is the tool that people reposition people's faces with. This is a tool where there can be a lot of moral issues. So, like Spider-Man used this power with great power comes great responsibility. So let's zoom in on this baby's face. So Command or Control, it's not going to let me do that in this. I'm going to have to hit the plus right here in the bottom corner and then space bar drag over. So we got this baby's face. We'll skip all these guys. These ones are very powerful. For us, we'll just pick the Face Aware Liquify tool. And then over here, we'll open up and expand this Face Aware Liquify drop down. Now, what's cool about this is I can drag these sliders around, or I can click and drag on these different little control things that appear on here to change aspects of the baby's face. So if I come over to mouth and I go to smile, I can be like, smile, please. And just like that, we can make them frown, we can make them smile. Like, it's creepy. So why don't we smile him? Why don't we move his upper lip around? Yeah, let's drag that upper lip all the way down. And why don't we drag that lower lip all the way down? So he's got kind of like a little smirk going there. Why don't we make his mouth? Oh yeah, let's make his mouth mine. Let's drag his mouth width all the way down. What about mouth height? Nah, I'm not seeing anything fun there, so we'll leave that one alone. Why don't we turn his eyeballs a little bit? So right here for eye tilt, I'm going to click this chain link in between it. So it's going to move both eyes at the same time. And you can see that we can turn his eyeballs. It's subtle, but it can help make him feel a little bit happier. So why don't we go ahead and drag that to 43 or so. And why don't we space his eyes out a little bit more? So I'm going to click that chain link between eye width, and let's make his eyes a little bit bigger. And then eye distance, let's bring them in a little bit. So if I click on and off preview, you can see the immediate difference that it's causing our little baby right here. Why don't we do a little bit of work on that nose too? Nose height, let's bring you down. Nose width. Yeah, why don't we widen it out a little bit? There we go. And just like that, like it's creepily powerful. We can click OK, and then Command 0 to zoom all the way out, and there we have it. Now notice that this isn't like a layer effect. It's the full layer. So keep that in mind, that when you use this when you use this liquify tool, it's not going to be undoable unless you get into some advanced things, very advanced things in Photoshop that make it undoable. But it's clunky and a little difficult to use, so I don't want to hop into it. Are these options available in the older version? For face aware liquify, I'm not sure. I think the early version of liquify didn't have face aware in it, but it did have the push and pull in it. So I'm not familiar enough with, what would that be? Creative Suite 6 would be the last paid option, to know if face aware liquify or liquify is in that. Again, most of the stuff that we have covered is in older versions of Photoshop. Not everything, unfortunately. All right, so unless we have any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. So last chance for any questions about basics in Photoshop. And again, like, the power of Photoshop is really about just having fun. And when you do stuff in Photoshop, I would, as much as possible, label your layers and keep stuff grouped together. So like, I didn't label my cupcake layer, so I double clicked on it and like cupcake. And we'll leave background. The rest of these are fine. The idea being that later, like, especially if you get into really complicated ones of these and you've got like 20 or 30 layers, having stuff labeled can be a lifesaver. All right, I hope this little webinar has been useful for you guys. Again, feel free to review it on Facebook and download the files that you see here, and have a great night. Are there mentors available at Do Space for Photoshop? I'm not sure how it's working with COVID right now, but yes, there are mentors available at Do Space for Photoshop, and I am one of them. So you can schedule time with me if you want, or you can schedule time with other people. If it's still only online, what we do is we can set up something. It's like Zoom or Google Meets or something like that they're using right now, and you can screen share with each other, so you can see each other's screens and answer questions back and forth. So it's a little bit like this, but more one-on-one. And then also, if you have like any direct questions, oftentimes literally just Googling it will, like, how do I change image size in Photoshop? There'll be a bunch of YouTube videos that go over the basic concept for it that can be quite good too. So if you only get caught up on one problem, asking YouTube is a really great option. And then usually Adobe will have a similar tutorial listed on their own help page as well, which are good. So like, if it appears on the Adobe help, go for the Adobe help as well. All right, we'll go ahead and call it a night. Have a good night, everyone.